Hi, this is the beginning of Lecture 1, which is about the scientific method. Now, each one of these screencasts is approximately 15 minutes long, so if it takes me longer than 15 minutes to give you the lecture, then we'll have two parts, and you'll have to watch two separate videos. Anyway, so today we're going to learn about the scientific method, and this is the underpinning of pretty much all of the sciences. So we're talking about biology, chemistry, physics, maths, etc. And it's a way of thinking about the world that we hope you will be able to take with you even when you leave biology. So let's start. Biology is the scientific study of life, and we see life is structured on a size scale that ranges from molecules all the way to the entire globe. And as a result, you can study biology at many different levels. Now, what are the things that would fall into the realms of biology? Well, what is alive? Well, living organisms tend to have some features in common with each other. The first of these is order. So if you have a look over here at this pine cone, there is a structure to it. Molecules are arranged in particular ways, and you can study how they're arranged and interactions between them. Regulation, this is the second thing that you'll notice living organisms have. They can often regulate chemical reactions. So, for example, that lizard is lying there warming itself in the sun, and that extra warmth is going to allow it to be able to increase its chemical reactions. Your body regulates things like how much water is in your body. If you don't have enough water in your body, hormones will switch on a system that tells you to be thirsty, and you'll want to go and drink water. Growth and development is quite common in living organisms. So here you see a little snake hatching from an egg, and many living organisms will go through various different stages of development where they change what they can do, and oftentimes they grow as well, just like a human, where you grow from a very small infant to a fully grown adult. Living organisms need energy in order to regulate themselves, grow, and develop. And here we see a puffin eating sardines. They're fish-eating birds. And the puffin is what we would refer to as a carnivore. It's eating meat. But other organisms can get their energy in different ways. So plants get their energy from the sun, and some bacteria can get their energy from other sorts of chemicals. All organisms have a response to the environment, and I love this picture of a Venus flytrap eating a dragonfly. It's a little bit of a Photoshop, I'm sure, but the Venus flytrap is a great example of a plant that has to respond to its environment. These plants normally live in areas where there's not very much nitrogen in the soil, and so it's hard for them to grow because nitrogen is important for proteins. What these plants do is when there's not enough nitrogen in the soil, they grow special leaves called flytraps, and those leaves can capture insects by using trigger hairs. There's actually 3 of them. You can see them on this picture here. There's 1, 2, 3 right underneath the dragonfly. So when a fly triggers the hairs, the leaf snaps shut, and the decomposing body of the insect will drip small amounts of proteins and amino acids that contain nitrogen, and that will drip all the way back down to the root of the plant and feed the plant. So it's actually a wonderful example of the response to the environment. Organisms also reproduce, as you can see from this cuddly little hippo family, and there are many different ways in which organisms reproduce. You may be more familiar with the traditional male plus female results in a baby, but there are all sorts of ways in which organisms can reproduce, and they're actually quite interesting. Evolution is a central tenet of biology. So here we have a katydid, which is related to a grasshopper. If you can see it, it looks a little bit like a leaf, and it has evolved what we would refer to as camouflage coloration so that it can avoid being eaten by predators. The scientific method and the concept of evolution are going to be two things that you will hear over and over again this semester. The reason behind it is that evolution really is the driving force for living organisms, and it has resulted in some tremendous adaptations, and we'll learn a whole bunch about those. Okay, so what are the levels of biological organization? Well, as I mentioned, the living world can be looked at from the molecular level, so here's a molecule, all the way to the global level, or the biosphere. And the in-between levels actually have names. So the levels of organization include cellular organization, tissues. So tissues are groups of cells that work together to perform a function. Organs. Organs are made out of two or more tissues, an organ such as your heart or your brain. An organism is a whole living creature that natural selection can act upon. It can reproduce, and you would be considered an organism. When large groups of individuals of the same species live together, we refer to that as a population. So we could talk about the population of wolves in Yellowstone National Park, or we could talk about the population of Phoenix, Arizona, where we'd be referring to the human population. Now, you are not isolated in the world. There's a concept called community. In biology, the word community refers to the populations of different species that live in the same place at the same time. So in this picture here, you can see fish that live with coral, and there are many different species of fish all living together, and they interact with each other. And so biologists often study the interactions between different populations. Sometimes species can help each other, sometimes they can hinder each other. You think about your own body, you are actually a community because your body has tons of bacteria that normally live in your body and help you to survive and to be a healthy person. So in your digestive system, you've got bacteria that help you to have produce B vitamins, and if you get sick, you might need to actually eat something like yogurt to help bring some of those good bacteria back to your system. So those are the levels of organization. Ecosystem is one level higher than community, and the ecosystem refers to both the living and the non-living parts of a place. So the ecosystem consists of the community, so those are living organisms, and the non-living, such as the rocks, what kind of weather patterns you've got, where are the nutrients and minerals found in that system. So now let's start talking about the scientific method. So we refer to it as hypothesis-driven science, and this means that we've got some steps that we need to talk about. A hypothesis is a proposed explanation for a set of observations. Proposed. It is a tentative explanation. It's a possibility. Now, a good hypothesis can't just be any explanation for a phenomenon. So, for example, when you're a kid, you lose a tooth and you put the tooth underneath your pillow and you're told that the tooth fairy brings you the money. Now, as a child, you may be able to adventure in unrealistic or non-logical statements for explaining phenomena. However, in science, a good hypothesis actually has to be based on logic. So you can't reach into the supernatural in order to provide an explanation. Now, once you have a hypothesis, you can use what we call deductive logic to test it. So that logic is flowing from general to specific. So we say, if this big thing happens all the time, then we can have a look at our specific case and see if that's going to be true as well. Now, normally the deduction takes the form of predictions about experimental results. So I'm going to show you an example where we will use deductive reasoning to say, if this particular hypothesis is supported, then I expect to find the following results. Now, what is the scientific method? Well, it's a process, and the process involves the following things. You make observations about the world or a particular phenomenon. From that, you will ask a question or questions. How does this work? Why? And then you will come up with hypotheses. Your hypotheses are your tentative explanations for your observation. Then you would design a test or an experiment to test your predictions. You'll find particular results, and those results you can use to either explain your observation or to generate more questions. Not all the time does a scientist actually have the ability to immediately say whether or not a hypothesis is accepted or rejected. Sometimes you have to do many experiments, and so it's not always just a linear process. Sometimes you go from the explanation back to a question, back to another hypothesis. So we're going to use an example of coral snakes to test the scientific method. You've heard the old child rhyme where it says, black on, what is it? Oh, I can never remember it. Red on black, venom lack. Red on yellow, killer fellow. Depending on where you are, the rhyme is a little different. Either way, normally when you see a snake that looks like this, you probably better not pick it up because it might be really venomous and that could be quite dangerous. So in Costa Rica there's a biological station and there's a lot of different snakes that have different color patterns. So here are some of the repeating patterns. Most of the ones that have got repeating patterns are really toxic. There are a few funny ones that, while they look just like the toxic individuals, they themselves are not toxic species. And then of course you have brown snakes, which more of them tend to be friendly ones than toxic ones. So the big question is, what advantage does a non-venomous snake have in possessing the color pattern of a venomous snake? Well, there are some reasons why you might expect patterning that's really bright. One example we find in biology is something called aposematic coloration. It's also known as warning coloration, and it basically says, I'm really nasty and toxic, don't touch me, otherwise I'll bite you, poop on you, hurt you in some way. So we've got three examples here. We've got poison dart frogs. Here are nudibranchs, which are toxic sea slugs. They're beautiful and they're deadly. And then, of course, your classic wasp and bee. Another reason behind why you might have bright colors is actually cryptic coloration. And it's a way to avoid being detected by others. So we've got two examples here. We've got an okapi, which is a relative of a giraffe, and on its bottom it has stripes like a zebra. And a jaguar has got spots. Now, you might think I'm crazy saying this is cryptic coloration because it really stands out to your eyes. Well, you have to think about it from the perspective of biology. I want you to think about a herd of zebra. So, yes, the pattern's really bright, but if you put 20 zebra all together and they're standing close together and you're a predator and you want to pick one individual out from the crowd, it's going to be really difficult because you don't know where one zebra ends and the next one begins, so how do you know who to aim for? So this is one of the premises behind these bright colors and patterns on the back ends of things like zebra and okapi. It actually makes it more difficult for a predator to see it. Now the jaguar has spots because it tends to live in forested areas. And if you've ever been into a forest and you see the